I assume you like your water with lemon. Just
Perfect.
Sure.
Thank
Great.
you.
Great.
Hey there, how's it going?
Nice to meet you.
It's Corey. Good to meet you. Great setup here.
Yes, we're just...
Excellent location.
Yeah, we record a lot of podcasts here.
Great.
It's, I don't know, this is kind of a meeting spot in LA for a lot of... I mean, I'm sure your film will open here next week.
I don't know. Is it?
Yes.
I assume,
Yeah. It's a great venue. It's one of those...
In the dome, I'm sure. Right?
Yeah. But it's a great venue in terms of, like, there's a social aspect. It's also a meetup for a lot of people, sort of central to LA.
It is central,
So all the it's also like, oh, let's all go see it here, and then there's always a post-film conversation.
Yeah.
Which is why we once in a while record them.
Exactly. Last time I was here, I saw like a double bill of Dunkirk, and then sat right over here discussing Dunkirk with a friend who loved it and a friend who hated it.
That's great.
And then stuck around and saw Lady Macbeth.
Oh, wow.
Extremely un-Dunkirk-like movie
Right.
about a
Right.
sociopathic murderess.
I guess we can actually start talking on these. Are we?
Awesome.
We're good with the levels, and we're good with probably the levels. You know that I tend to talk too loud.
How am I? Is this good?
You're perfect. Yeah.
Wonderful.
All right.
It was about my speaking range. Something like that. We'll see how animated I get.
Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast, Corey Finley.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is my co-host Anthony Ray Bench,
How's it going, everybody?
and we just saw your film last night, and I have to say, it's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
It's one of those that, to me, and I think it's something that, and it's not a horror film.
I think that's fair to say.
It's yes. I mean, there are some horrific moments, but it's all psychological.
Yeah.
And I really want to like dive right into it, but the audience, like the audience's reaction, it was just so. I mean, there's a gasp moment.
Yeah.
There's a gasp moment.
Oh yeah.
I love hearing those. Yeah.
But what I'm curious about, it started as a play. It feels so cinematic. I never would have guessed.
Oh, I take that as the ultimate compliment. Yeah, I was, it did start as a play, and I was sort of terrified that it would feel like a filmed play, which, not that there aren't some great sort of filmed plays out there, but I wanted to make sure it felt as cinematic as possible. So I love when people tell me they had trouble believing that it started as a play.
Now, was this something like you started writing a play and like kind of in the middle, or at some point just decided, no, this works better as a film, or did you actually finish the play and you were like, okay, I have to start from scratch and write this as a film?
I did finish the play, and we'd kind of gotten to the point where I was just starting to send it around to theaters to potentially get it produced and get a theatrical production together. But sort of in the final couple drafts leading up to that point, I started sort of developing this sneaking suspicion that it would work better as a movie. And I'd always just loved movies growing up, and had sort of fiddled around with a camcorder before I'd ever written a play. But sort of in those later drafts, it started feeling increasingly movie-like. I started kind of seeing it in close-ups more than I started kind of visualizing a stage. And there was a whole kind of, thriller wing of the story that I felt I couldn't fully tell on the stage. So yeah, the opportunity to do it as a movie began to present itself, and I grabbed that opportunity with both hands and sort of put the play version on hold.
Well, I want to put a pin in that and not forget that and come back to it. But what's your background? Because as a first-time director, I mean, you did what directors struggle their careers to do, which is to get tone right. It's a director's job, I believe. Primary role is to get the tone of the film right, and it hit all the marks.
Well, thank you.
So perfectly. That how did you work yourself into this? I want to just know a little bit about your background and what led to this moment of having the opportunity to make this film, which Thoroughbreds premiered actually at Sundance, right?
Yeah,
in
Sundance 2017.
Sundance 2017, and as with all things, it takes a lot of time to get to the moment now of the release.
Yeah.
Here on the precipice of that. But what's your background? How did you get to the point of even having the type of brain that could imagine something like this film, and then do, like I said, create this tone that is so many contrasting tastes? It's like a salted caramel something, because it's it's at times funny and weird and gut-wrenching and horrific in some moments.
Well, thank you. And I think it was one Coen brother or the other who had the great quote that directing is tone management. That's sort of the best two-word definition for the art of directing. But my background was in theater for a long time. Sort of right out of college, I moved to New York and started writing plays, and didn't really direct them. But I think a playwright, at least in the type of theater that I was doing, which was very sort of grungy, largely like basement theater and sort of any random venue that we could find theater. The playwright has a level of input into the whole creative process that I think is a little bit closer to what a director is used to in film. So when I started kind of seeing the story as a film, I knew that I was interested in directing, if that was possible, and I was lucky to find producers and then cast that were sort of willing to take that jump into the unknown with me. So I had very little kind of film education, no formal film education. And, when this started to come together, I started frantically reading, Sidney Lumet books and watching as many movies as possible and watching directors' commentaries and scouring the internet for everything that I could find. But no, my background was just in sort of the trial and error of putting stories up in play form in front of audiences as often as possible, and just kind of trying to refine those core storytelling instincts, learning, what makes people laugh, what makes people hopefully gasp. That's always the ultimate goal. Laugh, cry, what really falls flat. And I think through that, through those years of just working on plays, I thought a lot about tone, and I thought a lot about how to control the tone of a theatrical production. You sort of have fewer levers by which to manage the tone on the stage, it seems to me. You have you don't have the whole editing process. You don't have camera movement, obviously. You have sort of all the action obviously kind of takes place at a fixed angle from the audience, unless you're doing some sort of avant-garde immersive theater experience. But still, I was always really drawn to stories that were dependent on a very particular tone, and really enjoyed finding ways technically to sort of heighten that tone.
Well, let's dig a little deeper on that in terms of what were your priorities in terms of the tone management, so to speak. Like, obviously the cast was, key to this, but there are all sorts of other elements. There was a look to the film that it just looked utterly beautiful and stunning,
Lyle Vincent, who shot the movie. I was a huge fan of his work from A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, on Lily Amirpour's first movie. And that movie was all black and white, and this one is a very kind of saturated color film. But we were immediately on the same page about the sort of look that the movie should have. And we were very lucky to find kind of an amazing opulent home in Cohasset, Massachusetts, which certainly helped, sculpt a unique look for the movie. And
also, it's down to the makeup and the wardrobe for your two leads, which I just think that the interplay between the two of them, the chemistry, is really the thing that just keeps you watching, wanting to know. And also a type of character I don't know that we've seen really explored in a film, in the sense of these are two broken young girls.
Yeah.
From their various experiences. So
for me, it's probably the easiest way to describe the movie genre-wise is to say it's a psychological thriller or have a little bit of a dark comedy. But structurally, there was always almost kind of a rom-com thread going through it, in that the core of the story for me is these two young women and their relationship and the ups and downs of the relationship. And one of the things that I love about classic rom-coms, which have so little tonally in common with this movie, but sort of structurally, is the way in which the same two characters are sort of hero and villain at once. You know, there's that kind of dichotomy doesn't exist as much in romantic comedies, and they're both one another's chief obstacle and one another's sort of ultimate goal. And yeah, I think the story is about a lot of things, but for me, at its heart, it's these two, like you said, these two very broken, messy, complicated individuals who are both missing some piece of themselves, and it's about the way they find that missing piece in another person, and kind of the pain of that exchange, but also the beauty of it. And yeah, the casting of it was the single most important decision of the movie, and I couldn't have been luckier to work with the two that I did.
Yeah, I actually want to ask about the character of Amanda, played by Olivia Cooke, who I love. I'm a big fan of Bates Motel.
She's amazing.
She's absolutely great in that show, and she's great in this movie. What was it like writing a character that's just so devoid of feelings? Like, just absolutely just so just sterile in everything. Like, was there ever a point in your script where you wanted to maybe kind of hint that there was more to it? Or because you did very much play it like that's how she is.
Yeah, like the character says early on that she's got like a perfectly healthy brain, it just doesn't contain feelings. And that was one of the first lines that I wrote for the character, and it became her kind of guiding mantra. And I love movies that start with really extreme decisions and stick by those decisions and sort of find a way to make those extreme decisions work. And that was probably the most extreme for this movie, just having one of the two lead characters be sort of self-admittedly emotionless. I think like movies are, you know, at their core, movies are like containers for emotion, you know, and that's hopefully the most important thing they leave you with as an audience member, is a feeling. And yeah, that was definitely sort of a challenge of making the whole thing work. And I don't think it could have worked without Olivia's performance. And she's so sort of, you know, the performance is very strictly devoted to being a very specific sort of deadpan. Like the whole performance is in a really narrow tonal range, but she finds so many incredible like colors and nuances within that range, and it just always impresses me anew every time I watch it, just how much she's able to keep a character who should be flat, who should feel flat, extremely engaging. And I think there's like the flip side of her emotionlessness is that she's totally she's completely embraced who she is, and she has no illusions about who she is, and she's unapologetic about who she is. And I think that there's such a sort of deep wish fulfillment for all of us in those qualities, that it acts as like a counterbalance to the what could be the coldness of the character.
Well, following up on that, and I should mention actually for our listeners that we're not going to get into spoiler territory, but these are minor. We're talking about things that happen in the movie. So I recommend that you stop this, go see Thoroughbreds, and then listen to this interview with CORY FINLEY, the director of writer-director of Thoroughbreds. But there's a fantastic moment in the film where they discuss the technique, which is how to make oneself cry, to express emotion towards, to manipulate others toward an action. Where did the technique come from? Because I think this might be a real thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I before I ever, between the really bad camcorder movies that I made as a young kid and becoming a playwright, I was an actor. I think that's so many sort of kids' way into the theater, into performing of any kind. And I had a lot of like fellow, 14, 15, 16-year-olds at like the theater camps that I would go to who would brag about their ability to cry on command. And they all like, I remember there was this, one of the theater camps that I went to, I think age 16, there were like a couple kids who told me that you could make yourself cry by some combination of like sort of holding your breath and holding a certain tension in your throat and doing a couple other things at once. And I just love that it was not at all about, emotional truth or sadness. It was just like do these 4 physical things, and that's the cheat code to crying. And I think once I'd sort of discovered these 2 characters, that technique resurfaced in a more sinister, manipulative way in the story. And Olivia really did make herself cry with almost no lead up. 4 times in a row for the 4 takes that we did of that moment.
That's impressive.
Wow.
It's very impressive, and I think she her story has changed a little bit as I've talked to her about it, about exactly how she pulled that off. I think it was some mix of actually just willing herself to cry and then doing some actual sort of like emotional work, but she really she was able to turn from full weeping to sort of her comic deadpan on a dime, and it's a beautiful thing to behold.
That scene is going to have so many theater kids pass out from hyperventilating trying that.
Yeah, I should put the disclaimer. Don't try this at home on the front of the movie.
And the rest of the cast is, it works so well. And of course, you want to talk about Anton Yelchin and his character. His tragically passing away, was it last year or so? But the way that his character is used is completely unexpected.
Yeah.
You think it's going to go one way and it does not.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, okay, I can kind of see where this was going. Totally did not go exactly where I thought it was going to. Yes. Well, I like that. I like, so where did that were early drafts of the script? Was that different, and did you mix it up? And I think you also mentioned that he knew all of these suspense thrillers, like he just knew those like the back of his hand.
And Anton's role, Tim, was almost a cameo in the play version. I had to sort of contrive a way to get him into the same set as these other characters, and you only saw him very briefly, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to expand the scope of the story, just to get to know him a little better, because I loved the seed of that character. Anton made that role into something completely different, and I think he saw something in the character, sort of saw a real heart that I don't think any of us could have articulated, as well as he was sort of almost able to eventually able to perform it. But yeah, he was just an absolutely amazing human being and actor, and had such an incredibly prolific career, and I definitely count myself very lucky to be among the filmmakers that he worked with, and it is a long and distinguished list. And he was an incredibly deep and devoted sort of student of film as a whole. I think he had a particular love of film noir, and as soon as we started talking about the character, I just felt like a total fool who'd never seen a movie before. Such was the depth of his knowledge, but at the same time, he was so kind and inclusive about that and about all of his work. Just the most amazing guy, and his performance in the movie is absolutely one of my favorite parts of it.
The sound is a big part of the movie. Is the sound of this rowing machine? What's it called? The
ergometer.
Ergometer. Yes. This rowing machine that I'm trying to remember. I don't think we actually see it.
Yeah, it's an offstage character.
And it is
the ergometer. Yes,
kind of a character because it represents her disdain for her stepfather, who is abusive.
Yeah,
and that sound. How did that sound? I mean, it actually builds towards something, and certainly a tension. And it's sort of winding. It's a winding up, and it just works so well. It was a very effective device.
Yeah, the early reference for that whole device in the story was the Telltale Heart, the Edgar Allan Poe story, and we love this idea of so much of the movie is set in this big creepy house, and I love the idea of being kind of stuck in a house with your enemy, and of being sort of constantly aware of their presence even when they're not in the same room. And we tried to think of, what would be an extremely disruptive sound that would keep one of our characters awake at night, and it became this weird nightmarish rowing machine. And I had a ton of fun with Gene Park, who was our sound mixer and sort of head designer, playing with those sounds and figuring out exactly how real versus monstrous the ergometer would be, and it turned out in a way that I really love.
I mean, yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I want to talk about the character of Mark real quick. I didn't see him as kind of a definitive monster. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was a jerk. Like, don't get me wrong, but like I think, the character of Lily was kind of overreacting a bit, hardcore, and I loved that was just. I really loved that you went with that. Like, you didn't make him a monster. You didn't make him, a creep or anything like that. It was almost questionable,
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always think, moral gray areas are more interesting than really classic, hero-villain splits. And and you're right. I half-jokingly called him a monster earlier, but I wanted him to feel... To come into the movie that's really strong flavor and to feel horrible and to feel like sort of human fingernails on a chalkboard. But as we get to know him a little bit better, I wanted his character to feel more like a human being. And there's a moment in the movie where you really, for the first time, kind of hear him talking one-on-one with Lily. And I hope that it's a moment that makes audiences sort of reconsider exactly how horrible he might be.
yeah, I had to kind of stop myself because I didn't want to give that part away.
Yes.
But yeah, it just that character is far more complex than just being a monster.
Well, remember, everyone listening to this has already seen Thoroughbreds,
let's hope.
Yes. But just no major spoilers. But there is one thing also that really struck me is this letter that's at the end of the film. That's you hear through voiceover, it's read aloud. It is the strangest, I don't want to talk about what's happening while the letter is being read, but
Sure.
but just that the way that was written, I think you mentioned that was something that was written early on and didn't change.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think very early on, I was kind of rushing out a draft of the play to get ready for this reading festival that the play was a part of, and I kind of had no idea how to end it. It was long before I'd sort of settled on the ending, sort of the plot ending that ends up finishing out the finished movie, and I wanted, I think just as sort of a shortcut for myself, I wanted like a weird poetic sort of benediction over the movie to be sort of spoken by one of the characters, and so I just kind of, without overthinking it, without approaching it in a structural way, I just tried to sit down and write sort of a speech that spoke to some of the themes in the movie in kind of a strange, slanted, sideways sort of way, and almost knowing that it was kind of a placeholder and it would probably vanish in later drafts. But there was something I liked so much about it when it was finished, and I, even when we did kind of find an ending for the movie that resolved the plot threads a little bit better, something still felt very just live and mysterious and interesting about that monologue, and so I kept it in, and I think Olivia's reading of it really adds so much depth and complexity to it, and I like the way it finishes things out for sure.
I'm curious in it's a weird way of putting it, but the selling of the movie, I'm sure that it's weird because just I actually did not see the movie at Sundance in 2017, and I do know that sometimes there's minor changes. Did anything change between the festival release and the final release?
Focus was they were super keen on kind of leaving the movie the way it was, which was awesome. It was one of the things we really loved about their initial kind of sit down with us at Sundance. yeah, so we it is almost entirely unchanged. We just added an S to the title. It used to be called Thoroughbreds singular.
Is there a reason behind that?
Yeah, why would it? Because that's an unusual change, but
It is. It's an unusual and very subtle change, and I think the thinking was that when it's just Thoroughbred singular, it's easier to assume it's sort of a horse movie. Not that you wouldn't think that about the plural, but the plural sort of attaches it to this image of these two lead characters. Not to say that they are the thoroughbreds of the movie. I think that adjective applies to all the lead characters, sort of this culture that the movie's examining. But I think the thinking was that the S helps tie it to these two characters, these two really memorable performances, and makes it a little bit less abstract and a little more tangible. But
because I think when you try to describe this movie to someone and convince them that this is something that should be at the top of their list to see, because it's actually going to be opening in the theater where we're recording this interview now, at the ArcLight Cinemas in
fabulous ArcLight.
Yeah, in Hollywood. So opening here. So there's a way that this is why I like films like to see them at festivals. They're sort of in their there's no marketing. The marketing is the filmmakers made a movie and there's a description in the program guide that is generally vague, so as not to give anything away. And then there's the way it's sort of sold to an audience. Did you participate in that process in terms of, because you're trying to sell this project to other people? I mean, obviously the script stood on its own once reading the script, but you have to talk to people about it one way, and then you sort of pivot to, and now it's in commercial release. Is there sort of it doesn't change the movie, but it changes how you're selling it? Is that something you're involved in or whatnot? Because
it does, yeah. And I love my favorite movie-going experiences are when you can see a movie without even having seen the trailer.
Yes, mine too.
That's always wonderful and so surprising. I saw Blue Ruin, Jeremy Saulnier's movie, that way, and I thought it was a drama, and it got intensely bloody about 30 minutes in, and it was deeply shocking in the most satisfying way. But I do think that there's just so much noise out there, and there are so many movies, and TV is getting increasingly awesome. So I appreciate that movies have to sort of work harder than ever to cut through all the noise. And Focus, I think, has done a really good job of walking that fine line with the trailer and with the posters and all the materials, sort of presenting the most friendly, appealing, kind of funny, kinetic, crazy version of the movie in trailers and in all the materials, but also staying very true to the core of what the movie is. And I love that I think all of our trailers use a piece of music that is in the movie. It's this awesome piece by this sort of band DJ collective called A Tribe Called Red, and I think they really do express what the movie feels like, I hope.
No, I was going to say credit to Focus Features for that. The trailer is fantastic if you haven't seen it, but it's also, I think, in a good way, misleading. I actually think it's misleading in a way that is good because it doesn't ruin aspects of the film.
Good. I hope so. Yeah.
So good job, marketing department.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then is that something that you're involved in? Do you care about? I mean, the poster is beautiful for the film. Was that a piece of photography that was done after shooting, or was that something that was a production still? Or
yeah, we've got a bunch of posters. The main one is a very white poster with the two of them on a couch. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yes,
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that one is. I think it's a composite image. There's actually because the couch has a slightly different shape than it does in real life. So I think it's a mix of a couple of photographs that were taken on set, and maybe even stills from the movie. But it's definitely captures the feel of the movie, but also leaves a lot to the imagination, which I think is great. I think a lot of movie posters these days are a little bit overloaded with information, and this one I has a nice kind of emptiness and open space to it that I feel like captures something about the tone. Yeah,
it's you could frame it and put it on a wall as because it's just a beautiful photograph.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Also, the setting of the film feels like a character unto itself. This gorgeous home, even the outdoors. There's a scene where they're playing with those giant chess pieces, which it's funny, but I didn't know that was a real thing. So can you talk about that setting, how you even found that place, and how did that inspire or change anything about the script?
Yeah, it was a long and exhausting search for that house. It was definitely the hardest role to cast in the movie.
Oh, wow.
And we scoured real estate listings for weeks and months, and went and looked at. I don't know what the final count was, but it felt like 20, 30 different houses before we found our hero house, as they say, and. It was super important to me that it was big and that it was opulent, but that it had a little bit of menace to it, that it wasn't just sort of a big, pretty, modern home. I wanted it to have some menace and some character. And I really was intent on doing some of these long Steadicam kind of follow shots, very Shining inspired shots, following the characters around the space. And I wanted it to feel big enough that it felt like you could get lost in that house, and like there could be someone else sort of lurking around a faraway room in the house, and you wouldn't know that they were there for sure. The one that we ultimately did find was in Cohasset, Massachusetts, south of Boston, and was a pretty amazing, crazy home, and I think we all miss it.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of the movie is where Lily goes up to Mark's, like, I guess it's his study room, and she's looking for her mom, and then he's like, she's downtowning, and just that sequence where she's walking down, it's a very long, just drawn out sequence, and I love it because you're like kind of exploring the house with her.
Totally, yeah.
It's yeah.
And Lyle Vincent, the DP, got to do some pretty amazing lighting stuff in that shot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kind of in the middle section of the movie where we're more in kind of Lily's point of view. We tried to do sort of pushed, stylized lighting, and we talked a lot about the photography of Gregory Crewdson, who's an amazing kind of fine art photographer that does these very cinematic, elaborate, sort of suburban, menacing landscapes. And yeah, it's again, starting as a play, it was important to me that it felt the movie had a movement to it and sort of a kinetic energy to it, and it didn't get too static.
Yeah, and it didn't feel claustrophobic at all. It didn't have that kind of feel, which I think a lot of filmed plays tend to have that. It didn't feel like that at all. So I'm also curious about, because I do know that filmmakers listen to our podcast, and I'm impressed that after only 2 days of rehearsals, and you shot it in such a short period of time. What was it, about 20 days or
22 total? Yeah.
So how does that, when you're and you're also the focused on tone management?
Yeah.
So what were some of the challenges to just get to getting what you wanted in such a short period of time?
It was all a challenge, and it was all very daunting at first. And I think I was helped by the fact that I kind of didn't know how much I didn't know. I had a little bit of like beginner's foolhardy confidence.
And
it also helped that we were really fighting schedules. We first sent the script out to the actors in February 2016, and then Olivia Cook really wanted to do it, but also was going to go shoot Ready Player One that summer, that she needed to be finished by June 2016. So we only had like a month to adapt the script into a screenplay, and then about another month for pre-production, and then we were basically shooting. And I don't know if that math all exactly worked out, but it certainly felt like that. And it was there was a little bit of a productive rush, and I think I didn't have time to kind of second guess myself. And the same was true for the 22 days, which felt like enough to do what we wanted to do. And it is a nice brief movie with like about a 90-minute runtime, but it definitely not enough time that we ever were able to second guess ourselves.
And then could you identify, at least in your mind, what were, you mentioned tone management. It's been a thread in this episode of our podcast.
Yes.
What were the things that you looked out for? I know that certain directors, I feel, have fetishes for certain things. For some, it's just all about the actors. For some, it's the look or special effects, digital effects, which tend to dominate a lot of mainstream releases today. But it's what were the things that were really on your radar of like, these are the things that are really important to me, because I do feel that the look of the two female leads is so. There's just such a precision with regard to the way that they're dressed and their makeup and just every detail. I feel like a lot of attention was paid to certain parts. I wonder if you could just address the tone and.
Yeah, well, I think both of them, Olivia and Anya, both were very active in their own costuming and sort of styling in general. And I joked with friends as we were getting ready to do the movie that I never thought I would learn so much about women's hair and clothing and shoot footwear. So I certainly got into the weeds of it all, but it was important to me that they had a sense of ownership over how their characters looked. It is a critical part of any movie, and I think these were both Lily, I guess, is a very appearance-conscious character. I think Amanda makes loud statements with her appearance, but they are maybe in the opposite direction. And Olivia was really into the idea that the character would wear open-toed shoes, that she wears these Birkenstock sandals that are, very deliberately careless, and she always thought there was sort of a power move to showing off her toes in someone else's home. And she wears these great waxed hunting jackets, but the character continues to wear them indoors quite a ways into some of her scenes, and doesn't take them off when she comes indoors, so they feel like a sort of armor. But yeah, I think we all thought a lot about costume, and Alex Bovaird, our costume designer, pulled some really amazing stuff and did a lot of research on that sort of social class and geographical trends. But yeah, we thought a lot about that. And I think my main concern on each of the shooting days was just performance and making sure the actors were sort of all in the same movie together, and that we got everything that we needed to tell the story really clearly once we were in the edit.
That's great. So music also plays such a big part of this. The score is fantastic. What inspired that? I mean, it's just that and the sound design, I think, just was yet another layer. It's rare because we see a lot of films in our...
a lot.
No joke, but 20, 30, 40 films are submitted to the Film Threat website on a weekly basis. Filmmakers dying to have their movies, most of them first-time filmmakers, please review our films. And most of them are the best way to describe it is a bird with a broken wing. Yeah. There's something there, but they didn't have all the planets did not align for it to really work as a whole.
Sure.
And so when we first learned about it and watched the trailer for your film, it's just, I think it's rare to see a first-time writer-director have something out of the gate so accomplished.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, so strong.
Yeah, well, thank you. You mentioned the score. Erik Friedlander is the name of the composer. He's kind of a cellist by trade, and is a sort of virtuoso cellist, as well as a kind of avant-garde classical and jazz sort of composer and a big improviser. And he had a couple, as soon as we started talking about the score, he had a couple musicians that he works with a lot in mind, and particularly a prepared pianist and a percussionist. And I was always interested in having a score that was a sort of a small number of instruments. I like when the score can sort of tie a movie together and you can hear recurring sounds. And it's such a, partly thanks to Lyle's camera work, it's such a visually lush movie that I wanted the score to sort of cut against that. I wanted a different flavor. And I always thought that the two leads, it's among other things, a story of two people that really don't belong in their environment. And I think the look of a movie is obviously very influenced by the physical environment, but the score is this cool sort of floating variable that can sort of be exactly what you want it to be. So I wanted the score to feel very not of the world, not of the visual world of the movie, to feel sort of other and strange.
Yeah, that combination becomes really unnerving at times.
Yeah.
Just very unsettling.
It's very, very textural. Is, how I think of it. Yeah.
So for the 39 other filmmakers that sent their movies to us and are not sitting with us on the podcast, where was it with you? What were the things that you did, I guess, strategically leading up to the making of this that were important to you so that you could get a film that wasn't just seen at a festival? Because I will say, with some Sundance movies, there tends to be what was it? We were joking that like every time you see one, like 90% of the movies that play at Sundance have an acoustic guitar score.
Yes.
So,
sure. Yeah.
So your score just stood out so much. And so what is it that you would say, or at least maybe there are things you did you're not aware that you did to get to this place where you're sitting here with us right now with your movie.
How did you get to be so lucky?
How did you get here?
Yeah, how'd you get here? And how'd you do so well?
Well, I do feel very lucky indeed. I worked with a lot of amazing people, but I think the main thing I did was just spent a really, really long time getting this story right, and a really long time before that, fully presenting a lot of very flawed stories, a lot of very flawed plays, and putting them up and getting audience reactions and sort of exposing myself over and over again to failure and criticism and just sort of slowly learning what did work. And then once I had the seed of an idea I really liked with this play, the play that became the movie that is Thoroughbreds, it was about a little over 2 years, maybe even longer, of working on it for a while, putting it away, working on it again, taking it to a festival, seeing a reading of it, talking with all my friends about it, getting notes, incorporating notes. So I think it's important never to be such a perfectionist about one piece of work that you don't work on anything else. I think it takes a lot of iterations to get good at it, but I also think the key is coming up with one story that feels different and unique, hopefully, and really refining it and making it as good as it can be. Because it was only because of that. It certainly wasn't because of my past directing experience. It was just because I had this play that appealed to producers enough to start sending it out to cast, and then appealed to our two leads enough to want to play those roles. And that was the key. And I feel super lucky that those people jumped on board with it, and that we had a chance to get it made.
Yeah, I think actually that must have helped quite a bit, having that, immediate feedback, good and bad, from a live script reading.
Yeah.
Is obviously that's a useful tool that, coming from being a playwright, has to obviously contributed to the success of the movie.
It is really great, yeah. And I wish there were a clearer sort of analog in film. I think film is inherently a more, time-intensive and often cost-intensive procedure. And I think there are all sorts of different ways to make movies, and you can make them, I think, increasingly cheaply every year. But as technology improves, but yeah, it's that is the nice thing about sort of the whole theater community, is it's at least the New York theater community I know, it's a very good place to try stuff out publicly.
You mentioned technology. Sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. This is also, I think, a challenge for writers today, is how do you deal with technology? Almost any problem that happens in a movie now, especially movies from the past, could be solved with an app. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
We'll just Uber that, or just this, or I lost my phone. Whatever it is, there's an app that could almost solve any problem. And what I loved about Thoroughbreds is technology is in the movie, but it's used sparsely. You're not ignoring that it's not there, sort of an out of time, and you're not like having anything that would date it necessarily by sort of keeping a distance from the technology. But it's used. Was that something you were conscious of when you were working on this? Because it's just used very well.
Yeah, well, I definitely tried to write around technology as much as possible. Like, it was important that neither character has any social media life that we're aware of. I just felt like it would sort of burst the bubble of this tone and story. We do have a couple insert shots of text messages on phones and people typing, and I think that they are generally very uncinematic, and it's interesting though. I like we're all so we are all so dependent on our pocket technology, our iPhones and things like that, and that increasingly becomes a bigger and bigger part every year of our own personal stories. So I do wonder if a point is going to arrive, or if we've already reached that point where it is okay to shoot a shot of someone using a cell phone, because that is where so much of our own drama unfolds. I mean, it is not a visual thing, it is inherently unvisual to see written text on screen. But yeah, I think it's like an interesting formal problem that film storytelling as a whole is going to have to keep grappling with more every year, and it'll be fun to see how people keep tackling it.
I feel like that would be a good panel at the International Screenwriters Conference, is how do you deal with technology? It really does present a problem, I think, today for writers, especially in movies. But it's so now I'm curious, like, what your next, because first of all, I'm excited for your success. This movie's going to come out, and I know people are going to love it. But what have you got something else that you're working on that you can tease us about?
I have a couple things. I'm a very bad teaser, whatever the term would be.
Right.
And I don't think I'm at liberty to sort of announce them publicly yet. But I do have a couple different projects, and I will say more generally, I'm excited to keep kind of increasing the scope of every movie that I make, but to do that in a way where I can continue to have sort of a degree of control over our favorite word, tone,
yes, it's true.
And over sort of the feel of these movies, and I'm very interested in character-driven stories above all else, and I think I'm genre agnostic, but I love I do love movies that have some kind of genre at their core, and are playing consciously with genre expectations. So
that's a fantastic term.
Genre agnostic.
I love that. Yeah.
I wish I'd invented it. I know I've heard it from someone. I think it's a thing that a lot of like production companies say in general meetings. People have to be like, yeah, we're genre agnostic. We're just seeking the good stories, which aren't we all?
That's the first time I've heard it.
Well, I'm glad to introduce it to the podcast.
I mean, if Focus Features is smart, they've signed you to a deal and you're making your next movie with them. Or perhaps, who knows, maybe you're doing a Marvel movie. As far as we know, you're doing a Marvel movie, and you're, doing Machine Man.
Tell us after the podcast.
Jack Kirby
we'll
character.
do it off the record. I don't think any Marvel movies in the immediate future, but I did see Black Panther, and that is a hell of a movie. So I am newly re-energized about the possibilities of Marvel movies.
Well, I do think that Marvel's been really smart about cherry-picking really good emerging talent.
Yeah.
From an indie space. I mean, James Gunn being among them. I've known James for years, just when he was at Troma doing stuff. Yeah. And just to see him develop and go, and now he's doing the, Guardians 2 and 3 and whatnot, it's fantastic. It's great that, and that's where, if you think Chris Nolan actually came, he did, Following, which was at Slam Dance.
Yeah.
And then the next year, Memento, and then down the road,
the Antarctica one, right?
Yes.
Or was it Antarctica?
The one with Robin Williams and Al Pacino.
Insomnia?
Yeah.
Insomnia.
But then Dark Knight.
Dark Knight.
Or, Batman Begins.
Yeah, Batman Begins. Right. Then Dark.
Right.
Yeah. So no, I feel that if anyone from Marvel's listening to this podcast right now, you want to have a meeting with Cory Finley right now before he gets involved with this other project that he's going to be doing with Focus Features, I assume. I'm only assuming.
Well, I appreciate the shout out.
Yeah.
What we're saying is you're going to reboot Thor in like 10 years.
Something.
That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. The reboot. Yeah, reboots come sooner and sooner, don't they?
Yeah,
so
they do.
the rebooted Thor could be, 2020.
But I mean, it's the thing that this is what indie directors that are accomplished do so well is that tone. I know it is the recurring theme in this podcast. I think that's what I think the people in positions of power that are hiring for the blockbuster movies, I feel like that's the important thing to look for, is someone on that level. So thank you for doing. I mean, do we have
Thank you.
social media? Do you have social media at all?
I'm like a total Luddite. I have I have like a private Facebook with very few followers, but I am. One day I'll get on Twitter. I'm just waiting until the right moment.
Stay that way. It's a double-edged sword, the internet and social media. But I do know that you can follow. There's a Thoroughbreds movie, Instagram and Twitter. So look for that, and do not miss this film in a theater. You really want to be, enclosed for that experience,
Yes.
And with your full focus on it. Which I didn't mean to say focus because of Focus Features just came out.
You're just brilliant like that.
I don't know. I'm dropping the plugs, but thank you, Corey, for being on the show and being so honest with
Thank you
us.
so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Let's get out of here.